something on my YouTube to send people over.
Oh, that'd be handy. That'd be handy. Right, I think we're live now. Um, Happy St. Crispin Day, everyone. St. Crispin Day today. Um, and I'm joined with Connor, aka the YouTube channel Plotlines. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's great. And the reason Connor's with us today, and there is a very sort of important reason, is because I've been on his channel countless times. And we've talked about Star Wars. We've talked about, actually, I think it's just been Star Wars, really. Um, and Connor mentioned probably about a few weeks ago that he managed to get hold of a book which I've been very eager to get my hands on, and it's sort of elusive for me here in the UK. I cannot get it for love nor money. It's just not available. Ironic because it's actually published. It was published in in a place not too far from where I live. So um, it's and of course it's the Imperial obituary, the mysterious death of the British Empire by Major General Richard Hilton. Now, some of you may remember that it featured one of AA's cigar stream, and in this one, uh, we're going to be Connor was able to get a copy, and I've managed to get access a library PDF of it from a friend out there in another southern hemisphere, um, and we're just going to sort of go through the first chapter, introduction, and first chapter, um, and we'll interject between and sort of do a commentary on this. The reason this book I think is quite important for people in Britain, maybe even people in America, given the current state of things, of how really the British Empire came to an end. And you know, we hear lots of through education, through especially my time in school, you basically hear after the Second World War that all of a sudden, for no reason at all, um, Britain decided, along with you know people like Gandhi and Jinnah and all those in Pakistan and places, that the empire was to cease. And in reality, there's actually a few more. It's a completely different picture as painted by Major General Richard Hilton here, and he sort of looks at not just the internal factors but external factors and pressures on the British Empire, which really shows how it came to an end, and it exposes a lot of you know difficulties that many people in the UK probably today wouldn't you know would be hard to swallow. Um, and it Connor, do you have anything to add on this?
No, that's pretty good.
Cool. So we're going to start with the introduction here. This is also just really like reading along. We'll go to introduction, then we'll start with the first chapter. So just a quick note before, and this is sort of added before, in the book. Throughout the book, the use of the term England refers to England alone, only up to the union of the kingdoms. After that, it denotes the United Kingdom and eventually the entire British Empire. Its usage is simply a verbal convenience, and it is hoped that, as such, it will not be taken amiss. So there you go. So this is a bit of a history. This is like a sort of history of it all. So introduction. 900 years ago, the Battle of Hastings founded a new nation, which was destined to spread its language, influence, and to a certain extent its way of life throughout the world. Being numerically insignificant for her population at that time, scarcely exceeded a million, England did not build on the largest empire that the world has ever seen by her own unaided efforts. Scots, Irishmen, and Welshmen played their parts, and many of them were very distinguished parts in the building of that empire. But England worked alone till 1707 and has maintained the role of predominant partner ever since. There are other nations of the same racial stock in the north of the empire: Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, Finns, Icelanders. All these possess the same virile qualities which enable the people of the British Isles to make their mark upon the world. Some of these other nations did in fact figure predominantly in history. Sweden was a great military power for nearly 200 years and almost conquered Russia. In very early times, Denmark and Norway explored the coast of Greenland and Labrador and gave America the name Vinland long before the voyage of Columbus. Their Viking ships were the terror of the coastal populations as far afield as eastern Mediterranean. Denmark was one of the first nations to discover possibilities of trade with India. Until very recently, she still possessed a substantial overseas empire, and yet, for all their uh, uh, e- estimable virality, the Scandinavians have not, as a whole, deeply affected the course of the world's history. It seems reasonable to believe that the four small nations of the British Empire, the British Isles, might likewise have remained aloof from history, half hidden in the northern mists, had it not been for the fact that England in 1066 became partially impregnated with the culture of Western Europe.
It's AI. It's interesting. There seems to be a contention between a lot of different English or British historians about whether or not, like, Anglo-Saxon England versus Norman England, like, and it seems to me that the Major General had, has put his has shown his side in that argument. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's quite interesting, and it wasn't uncommon of that sort of, especially in the Victorian era, um, and later up until this point, that um, th- the Anglo-Saxon identity, um, that you would say the English people, the Anglo-Saxon people, were closely aligned with the Scandinavian, the northern people, the northern spirit. If you're familiar with Carlyle, there's quite a great bit of essays of his talking about this and this northern spirit. And maybe you can say sort of like the sort of Faustian adventurer, explorer, and it it very much demonstrate this. I mean, you're right. What he does is immediately, which is something you don't see in any history books today, he does actually proclaim that the English people are completely separate from the European stock. Um, and he'll go into probably explain deeper on a racial level as well, not just in a sort of racial characteristic, but actually deep on a racial level as well. And that our only similarities are that with the Scandinavians, which is true fundamentally. It is true when you look at the origins of the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. Um, also furthermore, and this is something that I think is important. If you look at the canonical history of the European people, so like the Spanish, the French, the Italians, and they look back at their history from the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, um, and when you look at that, effectively the barbarians would come in, these great warriors, whether they be Goths, Visigoths, Franks, Lombards, whatever, and they will go through a period of like I guess what you call like longhouse, they'll be assimilated into the culture, or they will, in some cases, they will just be exposed to the culture, and they will end up replicating it either through adopting Roman laws, or most commonly they'll be adopting the actual religion of the people and the language and the culture towards the latter period. Now, if you look at the Anglo-Saxons, what was different about them is they had no connection to the Roman Empire. And in fact, when they did arrive in Romano Britain, we know from archaeological evidence that, especially in the eastern part of England, the entire population, or roughly about in the high 80%, was completely replaced through DNA and everything. So the Anglo-Saxons, or descendant of the English people, behaved differently. And of course, when Anglo-Saxon England sort of came into existence, and the Celts and the Romano Brits were forced back to the borders of, like, say Wales, Cornwall, Cumbria, part of the West Midlands, Christianity couldn't penetrate these people, because they were completely, at that time, they were at odds. They weren't part of that Western European uh, that Western European culture and history, unlike the Goths, unlike the Franks. And it would take about a couple hundred years for them to really be somewhat assimilated. But even then, Anglo-Saxon Christianity had a sort of flavor of its own. It wasn't, you know, it it wasn't really. I mean, and as the Major General here, he says England wasn't really fully admitted into European history until the Norman conquest. Do you agree with that sort of trail of thought I've just set out, Connor?
I think that I'm not fully on board, but I also won't probably disagree too much, except for that I will say is that I believe Charlemagne had invited English uh, notable leaders into his court, but there are probably a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of times where they break apart, come back together, that sort of thing. I think it's sort of, a lot of this history sort of breaks apart by, Vikings and different things that keep a consistent Europe connected.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more favorable because, and maybe this is hard to explain to people, say maybe Americans, that the unity, or the connectivity, or the sort of, I don't want to say multicultural, because it's not that, but the idea that there is some sort of connectivity of European history, where I mean, yes, there is an element of truth to that in Christendom, but in reality, on the ground, it just wasn't there. I mean, um, you can draw cultural, ethnic distinctions between the Spanish, the French people. If you go back to you can you, because of their proximities, there is that kind of shared history. And then, of course, you have Charlemagne. Now we look at Charlemagne, his empire. He took control of Aquitaine. He took it of Gascony. His brother, who died, southern portion of what's now modern day France. He would then go on to effectively conquer the Saxons. Um, Central Germany was under his belt, Bavaria, and then he would conquer the Lombards. And so, effectively, he was technically the sole Christian ruler in Europe, apart from the various Saxon kingdoms, and maybe, like, you could argue the Spanish kingdom, or the Asturian kingdom in the north. But reality, Charlemagne, his at that moment in time, his kingdom was the Christian kingdom. It was the Western Imperial, that the Western kingdom. Um, outside, of course, the Roman, the Eastern Roman Empire at the time. Um, and I think, a lot of Spanish, a lot of French, and Germans, and Italians, um, can and do trace, because he, of course, he in Europe, he is known as the father of Europe, and there are awards, there are medals dedicated to him. Um, and for the English people at the time, their equivalent was, of course, King Offa. You know, who was around at the same time as Charlemagne, and they did correspond. But that when it comes to those sorts of era-defining moments, which changed the which absolutely changed, not just on a racial level, but on a political, on a purely cultural level, Europe. I think the English people were shielded from that. I mean, the only time that there was change was really the Vikings, and then the Normans.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah. Um. So I'm just gonna see where. Uh, Sorry, I've lost it. Oh, I'll just finish off the introduction. This is the last sort of paragraph bit. The Normans, though of the same Nordic race as many of the pre-Norman English, had absorbed much of the French outlook and way of life. Above all, the Duchy of Normandy was a part of the French feudal structure. Their arrival in England and eventual fusion with the Saxons inevitably caused England to play a dual role in history, that a entanglement of continental affairs as well as the maritime nation whose future lay overseas. So that's just a final bit. Yeah, I mean, one thing that is conveniently, and even when I was in school, it was never ever explained, um, that the Normans are always represented as French, and I think there's a lot of um, gloating on progressives that love to do this because, especially within England, that to diminish England's, the England and Britain, the idea of our greatness and our superiority over the French. And it's like, oh yeah, but you've had so many French, you were conquered by a Frenchman. And it's, well, no, he wasn't French. I mean, he wasn't ethnically French. He wouldn't have viewed himself as French. He was a Norman. He was of of a Danish tribe with a kind of like almost like a confederation of Danish and Norwegian tribes, and they know this through DNA and archaeological from various Norman burial sites in Normandy, um, and they were given Normandy that was given to them was sparsely populated, and it was um, I mean, the only truth is they would have spoken Latin and the French at the time, um, and they would have. I mean, as we know, Rollo, who was their founder, adopted Christianity, um, and was absorbed into a feudal structure. But in many ways, the ironic thing is they were ethnically similar the um, to the Anglo-Saxons. I mean, Rollo's tribe came from uh, modern day Denmark. I mean, that's the origin. That's the origins of the of Saxon tribes and Angles and Jutes.
Yeah, I'd say it's similar to if the Varangians had conquered some piece of land in the Middle East or something and had inhabited that land. They wouldn't say that they were Byzantine like peoples. They would be, Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's it's sort of like it's St. George's Day that you have like you average like lazy progressive that says, oh, you do realize all you racists are like support who are commemorating a Turkish warrior from Cappadocia, and it's like, well, number one, he wasn't Turkish because the Turks didn't arrive; he would have been Greek, and number two, well, that's not the point. We celebrate him for his commitment to God, to Christ, and all the reasons that come with it. But yeah, I mean, it's just a very lazy outlook at history, and it's and it's a very like a low. It's just low IQ takes, and then what makes it really bad is that many progressives use these low IQ, uh, you methods to basically propagate these historical lies, because it's almost like I don't know if you've heard of these things like mock the weak, or thing like that. You have like these big brain British comedians, all nihilists, all atheists, and will denigrate everything down to um you know to little or no value. And this is that sort of tactic, and it's very common in this country with information like this.
I try not to pay attention to atheists. Uh, um,
Fair enough. Yeah, we have state sponsored atheist comedians. So um, yes.
but yeah,
Um,
those lies are just lazy.
I see Alice. I haven't been forgetting you, Alice Little, in the chat. I've been seeing you been posting. Stephen Fry, yeah, being the arch one, and he has got like a book on Greek mythology, um, which I recommend. You probably don't read, because if you want a good book on like Greek mythology, you need to find one where where it doesn't censor. There's a lot of that's the other thing. There's a lot of books on like the Greek gods where they censor like what they do. Yeah, all the incest, and I can't say the R word on here, but yeah. You get my idea on what goes on,
naughty,
and
naughty things.
non-consensual things. So um yeah. So a lot of that is like sort of censored or airbrush, which kind of you know diminishes the way that people think. Sort of. I actually do think that there is an aversion to. I don't want to go full Nietzsche in here and sort of Bronze Age Bronze Age mindset, but I actually do think there is this certain, from the modern mind, there is this. A lot of these people just can't comprehend the sort of Bronze Age warrior spirit mindset. They just can't comprehend it, and so they have to sort of remove it because it's just totally alien to them. Um, anyway, be that as it may. Connor, shall I continue? Shall I sort of start with the first chapter then?
I don't think the first chapter is. I don't think you finished the introduction.
Oh no, sorry, I haven't. Sorry, I went to the next page. I I'm on the PDF. Yes. So let's continue. Had Hastings not been fought, neither the British Empire nor the United States of America might ever have come into existence. Oh God, I have to get a time machine then.
Yeah, I'm not
um,
sure that's a good. That's not the best argument for the good greatness of the British Empire
I'll get a time machine and hand out like
and for
AK-47s to
Hastings.
to the Saxons. What were the root causes of the British Empire, or for that overflow, its own original frontiers, and to occupy and administer additional territories? Well, over a dozen incentives can easily be brought to mind, and most cases of uh, expansion show a combination of several incentives. The desire for unilateral exploitation of new lands is the usual reason quoted by extremists of the modern school of anti colonialism. But although self interest no doubt uh, actuate, uh, actuated British imperialism sometimes, it has rarely, if ever, been the sole reason for an extension of British rule. An unbiased study of the empire's growth will show that almost every acquisition of fresh territory was uh, a- actuated primarily by motives which were beyond reproach, and in many cases by motives of a worthy and altruistic nature. Among the former can be counted exploration, a natural and harmless human instinct at a time when new continents were being discovered, legitimate commercial enterprise, and the migration of religious or political refugees from Europe into attractive but sparsely inhabited lands. Among incentives of an actively worthy nature, we find cases where extension of British rule was induced by missionary zeal in East Africa after Livingstone's travels, or by the urge to surpass social evils such as the slave trade, or the bloodbath of Benin and Ashanti, or the burning of Hindu widows in India. Many other advances of British frontiers were made because of the peace and order of British administrated lands were being disturbed by the anarchy of misrule of neighboring states, as when the East India Company successfully had to annex um, a region in the Punjab. I'm not going to pronounce that. There have there have even been instances where the British were implored by inhabitants of free countries to assume the protection of or administration of those countries. There are some who say that more than sufficient books about the British Empire already exist. It is true up to a point. To justify publication a history of the British Empire must break new ground. It must challenge generally accepted beliefs and must back its challenge with evidence hitherto suppressed or ignored. This is the present writer's intention. Emancipation of the undeveloped nations is one of the most generally accepted beliefs of our day. It is held not only by people whose upbringing has debarred them from seeing any good at all in our country's civilizing work through the world, but even by many who were brought up to appreciate the great work of our ancestors. The this latter class of thinkers admit readily enough much of the good which lies to the British Empire's credit, but they argue that the fruit has ripened and ought to now fallen from the tree. They maintain, in fact, that the breaking of the colonial empires and the emergence of independent nations is but human progress in a new inevitable form.
Hmm.
There we go. Um, yeah, so this is actually because, of course, when he wrote this, the anti-imperialist doctrine was being it had been formulated by communists, Marxists, socialists as a core thesis of their ideology. Um, it had also started developing by liberals, by progressives, by social democrats, by um, um, probably even libertarians. Those scumbags. Um,
Libertarians
from
exist in England.
No, well, no, I mean, yes, but like libertarians in like a global sense. I mean, of to argue anti-imperialism, not just in England.
Sure.
Um, but in like reduce like the reduced government arguments that come with it and all. But
Hmm.
that that I think what um I think what he rightfully points out is that there's this idea, and I think this is deep rooted in many sort of in the sort of Marx socialist school, is that the imperialism in the British Empire was wholly and explicitly capitalistic in nature, like the American empire that exists after the Second World War in the 60s at this time. This book and that's sort of on its way out now in 2023. Um,
With
and
style and insanity.
yeah, and emperor who shit himself while the White House burns. Um, so, but I mean, in all seriousness, though, that what he does is he actually the rebuttal claims is something which I've heard before by relatives who were around and who served in administrating the British Empire in India and elsewhere in the Far East. And it um so in reference to like what he was saying about India, you had who was it? It was Clive of India, who was the one to stop the bride burnings by the Hindus. Um, in Livingston, the reason why the British moved into like the East African region and went up was to prevent Arab slave traders to come down and to kidnap populations of what I guess what's now like Tanzania and parts of East Africa. And that it's and the reason why these sorts of stories are forgotten is it removes any it is completely because a lot of the books and everything were done by the socialists and anti colonists and people with ethnic grievances at the time, right? And that's sort of the modern view, that's the accepted view today. And what he's pointing out is actually the sort of non-material reasons and actual maybe spiritual transcendental reasons why figures like Clive of India, Napier, Gordon of Khartoum, all these characters, Livingston, these great explorers, these Victorian fellows had wasn't just I'm going to make money, because a lot of them had money. A lot of them came from money. They had enough. It wasn't like they were entirely impoverished. I mean, anyone that I would say had was sort of impoverished, probably Wellington. His family lost a lot growing up with the death of his father at a young age. I mean, do you have anything to add on that last paragraph, Connor?
Do you think people got lazy? Because it's a lot of work to maintain an empire, and it just seems like they a lot of the British were going out of their way to fix problems that weren't their own.
I think I don't think the British Empire was equipped to handle. Well, this is the thing, and I think Richard Hilton might mention this, and I think this is something that it's quite hard to get around. The British Parliament. Okay, you think about think about Victorian England, like late Victorian England, sort of 1899, 1900, the height of the Empire period. You have your Prime Minister, you have your departments, you have your civil service, you have your the Crown, the Lords, the law lords. You have all this sort of structure of government, and then you'd have like colonial administrations. You would have directorates. You would have all these sort of things. It wasn't like the Prime Minister could like send a telegram and order, you know, I want this done in like Sri Lanka or Ceylon. I want this done in Rhodesia. It didn't work like that. In many ways, the Prime Minister and British Parliament had literally very little say in the actual governance of the empire. It was very much dealt to the military and colonial administrators, lords, and largely the civil service. Mainly the civil service were the ones that dealt with it. And I think there was. I think when you had the sort of emergence of liberal democracy on one side in the West and liberalism, republicanism, and then Marxism and socialism, I don't think the British Empire was probably equipped for that. I also think
Do you think
that
that's because of the Civil War?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think the character, because what brought down the British Empire wasn't the character of Britain. It was largely, and I think this is what it'll come down to, is it was largely external forces and pressures. And I think fundamentally, if you look at the UN Charter, mainly created by America, of decolonization and the Soviet interventions in Africa and other parts where Britain, had colonial presence. I think it was other countries like America and the Soviet Union, tag teamed to to basically bring down the British Empire, um, uh, and those governments. And it, you know, I think and this is something that he got in his book when he was talking about the British governance in Palestine. That you had uh, these various Zionist terror groups at the time, like the Sten Gang and stuff, and they were being directly funded by organizations in America. And then you look at the Irish Brotherhood, which was the first. The Irish, the Easter Rising was really the first cracks in the British Empire, because it, number one, it was so close to home, and also number two, um, it sort of began what would be the I guess the start of the decline. Or because Richard Hilton, he says the decline sort of started in the 20s and the 30s. I think he actually he goes into great detail in this book of why he thinks that, instead of being after the war. Um, but I think a lot of work was done by external forces. I also think there were people within the British establishment that emerged after the Second World War who were very much aligned with other nations, let's say, who also helped in this endeavor to bring down the empire. Um, and yeah, it just couldn't hold out. It just couldn't hold out against this sort of threat. I mean, do you agree with that position at all, Connor? Or do you want to push back on me a bit?
I just think there might be. I don't push back on the fact that that's probably what did it at the time. I'm just thinking back. Maybe there were possible means of avoidance of said situation, and I would think that it might have started with the Civil War.
The English Civil War, you mean?
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
of course. I would not be referring to. I think I'd actually say the American Civil War if I. I don't know why, but I think of the Civil War as the English one.
Right. No. No, I do understand what you mean, because of course it's the Whig progressive view of history, etc., etc. I mean, the way that I view the problems that the late 20th century has is that there is an ideology where you are, um, basically you're born to believe that whether you're white American or white British, that you're scum of the earth and you're the you're colonizer. You know all the rhetoric that goes along with it. Um, and you, I think in this work, when you look at the back of the British Empire, the one that Richard Hilton was talking about, and this is like the ultimate debate that's been going around. Uh, is the American Empire the origin of woke, or is the British Empire the origin of woke, or what we class as woke? Um, worshipping the minority, persecuting the majority, the white majority, that sort of stuff in the culture and in the media and politics and law. I don't see that in the British Empire. I mean, you have to remember the British Empire was explicitly in group in favor for English speaking civilization, and for the its people. They weren't, number one, they weren't blind to race. Okay, maybe they didn't like enslave half the. They didn't do like a Spanish thing and like killed off half the population and enslaved the other half and created a new race or something in India or something mad like that. But at the same time, they did. There was distinctions between classes and races, and there was a hierarchy. You know, that there wasn't like this. And also, when you look at colonial administration, there wasn't tearing down of government structures and creating like some parliamentary state that to replicate Westminster in India or something. That wasn't the case at all. They still had local regional rulers where the laws of that land continued. I mean, even if you look at the British construction of Afghanistan before we were kicked out in the in what was it, the 1850s, we installed an Islamic king. We made sure that the law of the land at the time was in line with the population. But then, if you look at Afghanistan recently, I mean, you had some corrupt, Americanized Afghan bureaucrat who was installed, and you had LGBT flags flying around, the government district of the capital, and like a mural to George Floyd. I mean, like you could clearly see these two, like, differences in, and I think you can point a lot of like liberalism and Whiggish history to, you know, some follies and mistakes into how governance work. But I do think this is like, it is a different kettle of fish you're dealing with here.
I don't disagree that the United States is the origin of the woke. I'm fully on board with that. Britain
Mm.
really didn't have as much to do with that.
Yeah. Um, and in the 60s, while this was all going on, you could see a decline in the British Empire, but also you saw in America the overthrow of the, I guess, what you guys call the WASPs. The WASP America was overthrown, um, and it was weakened in institutional terms, but not just in like political terms or demographic terms, but I'm talking about institutional and legal terms. It was overthrown. Um,
Yes, us, the Irish, rose up and took power.
Well, it wasn't just the Irish. There was an alliance, a loose alliance of elves and orcs. I'm joking. Um,
The Irish were very instrumental, I would say. The Irish have always been a problem, and being one of them, I see that very clearly.
yeah, I mean, and this is the thing. I mean, it's not the first time in history. I mean, even if you go back to like the Islamic caliphates, the Abbasids. I mean, the Abbasids or the Abbasids, however you want to pronounce them, the way that they overthrew the Umayyads. I mean, it was like, okay, you have this huge Arab empire where it's like completely like near enough like a religious ethno state where only the Arabs are in charge. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a bunch of disaffected Arabs, who don't rely on the don't sort of adhere to the in group, and then we're going to get some like Iranian converts, Iranian Zoroastrians, some like Afghan Hindus and Buddhists, uh, some East African slaves, and then like this like loose, and then like some Christians here from like Eastern Church Christians here, and it's just gonna be a collection of like all these different groups, but it's all going to be united of just bringing down the Arab, this Umayyad, and that's how it happened largely. Um,
Hey,
and
I kind of think we should probably get to the chapter one.
chapter one, yes. Sorry,
We haven't even started chapter one.
I know I'm rambling. Okay, we need to start. We need to get through this. Okay,
Been
so
44 minutes.
I know. Good thing we're not doing a whole book review tonight. Maybe like a 24-hour stream.
We'd be here for the entire night.
We would. I know it'd be like 2 nights in a row. We'd be doing nonstop. Okay,
No,
so
no,
British.
I mean, like through the night. If we were doing a full
All
book
right.
review, we'd be up till
Yes.
ungodly hours.
True. So, chapter one: the British Isles in Europe. To understand clearly how a small island came to rule the largest empire in the world, one must first obtain a clear picture of England's slightly complicated stance, with one foot in Europe and the other in the others striding the seas. William's victory at Hastings imposed a continental link upon our country. For 400 years after Hastings, Norman kings involved their island kingdom in romantic but fruitless wars with the Kingdom of France. Romantic these wars may have been because of it. It was the age of chivalry, and because the English won resounding victories at uh, Tingebury, Surrey, Poitiers, and Agincourt. Uh, but fruitless all these victories were for England because of the wars themselves were simply dynastic quarrels in which successive English kings, uh, in their capacity as uh, Dukes of Normandy, Counts of Anjou, or claimants for other feudal titles, were using their English soldiers and their English treasury as pawns in a series of feudal land grabs. These almost incessant wars culminated about 1337 in the Hundred Years' Wars, which drained both countries of manpower and wealth, but ended in the final expulsion of the English from France, leaving in their hands only Calais, Havre, and Chateau de Guisnes. These humiliating loss of continental dominions uh, was a blessing in disguise for England, for it freed her for a while, from continental entanglements to pursue her true destiny as a maritime nation. Two valuable intangible abilities occurred to England from these otherwise useless wars: a tremendous reputation for steadiness in battle and deadliness of firepower, won by the English archers at Surrey and maintained through changes of weaponry right through to the contemptibles of Mons, and secondly, a sense of superiority of English fighting seamen all over continental sailors, resulting from the Battle of Slurs. Uh, Though freed from the false destiny of trying to become a continental power, England never England, never after Hastings, succeeded in cutting quite apart from the continental entanglements. During the long Anglo French struggle, the kings of France had discovered a weak point in their insular enemy's armour: the simmering hostility towards England, in, in, uh, evinced by Scotland, Wales, and later Ireland. Time and again, uh, right up to modern times, France, Spain, and lately Germany tried without success to stab England in the back by means of real countries. Uh, by means of real or uh, fancied anti-English sentiments in one or other of the Celtic countries. For a long time, while Scotland was still a separate kingdom, this danger of a war on two fronts was often a cause of grave anxiety to England, and this danger persisted until the Jacobite rising of 1745. But in sorry, continue, Connor.
I'm just saying, I gotta add in, I am pro Jacobite.
Pro Jacobite. Yeah, okay. But in later years, the fusion of our small nations into a generally united British nation reduced this danger to the comparatively trivial dimensions or subversive actions by separatist factions in Ireland. It is important to note that this danger was abolished not by military English action against the smaller partners, but by gradual growth of a spirit of loyalty to one British nationality under one monarch. Um, I would say though that shared unity, that nationality of a Britain, of a British identity, was actually sort of founded under the Stuarts. Um,
I agree, but there were, I mean, the Stuarts also had enough division in governance.
yeah,
I would say they they failed when they began to centralize the rulership of Scotland and England and Ireland all in one place.
I mean, I also think that you know they in England they governed as Scots, and that's probably why. That's why that's
That's
why it
also
didn't
a
really work
problem.
out. So I was going to. Proof of this can be found in the fact that Irishmen have always been among the finest soldiers in the British Army. They have provided many of our best and most distinguished generals, even today, despite the neutrality of the Irish Republic and its self inclusion from the Commonwealth. Irishmen continue to enlist enthusiastically in the British Army, and that's even very true today. I was there, Connor, during the even up until Iraq and Afghanistan, the amount of Irishmen from the Irish Republic that have joined the British Army is very high. It's very high indeed.
Well, what war would you participate in the Irish army? Right? Like, they're not going to war with anybody.
No, true, and yeah, and I think that's why a lot of them do, because a lot of them want to see action, and also a lot of them aren't. I find like the quote unquote American Irish are just ideological nutters compared to real Irish, but
Well, there are two different types of American Irish. So,
well, yeah, I don't care. I don't care about your Kennedys and your Bidens. They're all a bunch of
oh, those are the
left
same.
people.
Those aren't even like the two different. Those are the same. You just said the same.
Well, I don't care. They're all the same to me. I
I
don't like
mean,
them.
like the Scots Irish, like and then the Northern Irish.
Oh,
There's the Irish from the south, and then the Irish from the north.
yeah, Ulster Scots. Okay, okay, I'm. Oh dear, Connor. Oh dear.
Dear what?
Ulster Scots.
Well,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm
They're
not
not.
sure they were as entrenched as Ulster Scots when they came to America, but the
I mean, you call them like what do you call them? Scot
Scots
Irish.
Irish.
Yeah, I mean they're not really Irish, but they're Ulster Scots that they originate from Scotland. Okay, let's not get into semantics. I mean, if you
Yeah,
ever go
but
to North,
there are even Irish that went over to Scotland and then came back, and
yeah, yeah, I know.
they're Celts. But what do you want from us?
Yeah, they count. Yeah, I mean, just don't. If you ever go to like Northern Ireland or East Belfast, don't call like them like, oh, you're Irish or Irish Scot, because that'll just start a riot. So
What are what do you call them?
Ulster Scots, Ulster Scots. That's all they are. They're just Ulster Scots.
Sounds so weird.
Yeah, well,
Then why is it Northern Ireland?
because it's Ireland. It's
But
just
then
the location is Ireland.
shouldn't they be Irish then?
Well, no.
That doesn't make sense. It's like
Well,
if I went to England and didn't
okay, no, no,
run into English people.
Connor. Okay, Connor. Um, Pakistan is in the Indian subcontinent. Okay, it's in the Indian subcontinent, right?
Yes.
But we don't call it India, do we? We don't call them Indians because they're not Indians.
Yeah, no, I just mean like you expect to meet English
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah,
in England. You expect to meet Irish people in Ireland. That's all I mean.
yeah. I mean, largely you had the Ulster plantations where a lot of the majority of the population are descendants of, I mean, Scots, but also English, Dutch, German. It is very I mean, yes, you do have an Irish, like the Irish Catholic population, and you do have like a smaller group of like Irish Protestants, like Church of Ireland types, but largely, the that yeah.
I guess what I mean is why don't they just call it Ulster Scotlandia or something like that? You know what I mean? Like it's a of course it's part of the Irish the island of Ireland, but it also is its own thing too.
Yeah. Well, you have to remember that at the time the Ulster Scots were around,
Mhm.
they, even though they were separate, it didn't matter because it was all part of Britain.
Well, yeah,
Ireland, Scotland.
that's the difficult part is it's all because of the the free the
Well, it's all
free-
because of the. I mean, when you had the split of Ireland, because what you have to remember is when Ireland was, you had the Irish independence. Northern Ireland had to basically refuse and sign the Ulster Covenant, where they basically the six counties refused to submit to the new Irish government in Dublin, the Irish Republican government. Um, and I mean, in the end, Michael Collins accepted it. And of course, he was assassinated, and you had like the Irish Civil War or something that was like a brief conflict afterwards. But
Yeah, made
yeah,
for a
I'm
good movie.
yeah with Liam Neeson and Alan Rickman, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, um, yeah. I think it was. I think what you have to remember, there was a lot of in. I mean, to go without saying, there's a lot of hostility between the Ulster Scots and the Irish, and um, that was that was reignited really 1916, and then further with the Irish War of Independence, and then later on the Troubles, because you have to remember a lot of Irish Catholics in Northern Ireland basically worked with subversive civil rights movements in America, and because originally the protests in Northern Ireland during that led up to the Troubles were basically under the guise of like, oh, we want civil rights, because at the time the Protestant majority, would exclude them from governance, police, certain job positions in the country,
Mhm.
for good reason, as we later find out, um, for good reason. Um, yeah. So anyway, I'll continue, shall I? Unless there's anything.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So yeah, the Jacobite rising of. But in later years, the fusion of the four small nations into a generally united British nation reduced this danger to the comparatively trivial dimensions of subversive actions by separatist factions in Ireland. It's important to note that this danger was abolished not by English action against her. Uh, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah, so
You,
British nationality under one monarch. So this is the bit we got to.
you
Uh,
make it.
pre-
You're at quite apart, I think. Right?
Sorry.
Yeah, quite apart.
No, sorry, I just skipped that bit because that was the bit we got up to, I think, before we paused.
No, we got through.
Oh,
We got through the Irishmen continue to enlist enthusiastically in the British Army, and then quite apart from occasion.
okay. So it's important to note that this danger was abolished not by military English action against her small partners, but by the gradual growth of a spirit of loyalty to one British nationality under one monarch. Proof of this can be found in the fact that Irishmen have always been among the finest soldiers of the British Army, that they've been provided many of our best and most distinguished generals, even despite the neutrality of the Irish Republic and its self-exclusion from the Commonwealth. Irishmen continued to enlist enthusiastically in the British Army. Uh, quite a, quite apart from the occasional intrigues of England's continental enemies with her partners in the British Isles, the evolution of maritime commerce progressively tended to reduce the value of the Channel as a isolating barrier against entanglement in continental affairs. Though the narrow strip of sea retained its strategic value as an obstacle to invasion, uh, and has continued to do so up until the present day, as the mid-century German found out in 1940. Uh, I can't say his name on YouTube, I'm afraid. So, um, yet from Hastings onward, it has become progressively more and more a concern for the English statesmen and strategists to see that no hostile power shall dominate Europe, and above all, that such a power shall not establish itself firmly along the coast between the River Seine and the uh, Zundersee. Thus, it has been a constant problem for British statesmen throughout the gradual building of an overseas empire to reconcile the conflicting claims of what came to be called the Blue Water School and the Continental School of Thought. In our peacetime economic, diplomatic, and social policies, no less than in our wartime strategy, a correct balance has always been required to be sought between the demands of these usual conflicting calls. England, and in due course Great Britain, has never been able to ignore the continent, but this has never meant and does not mean now that she must jettison all her oceanic commitments and ties and resign herself to become a mere offshore island of Europe, as former Prime Minister has inaptly called her. Um, Many instances, I think he's referencing, I, I, I think he's referencing, uh, um, I don't know if he's. I think it's either Churchill or Macmillan. I don't know if he's referencing in that one. Um, Many instances can be noted to illustrate how difficult a problem that this has been for British statesmen. Perhaps the most striking example was the clash of wills between King George II and the elder William Pitt, Earl of Chatham, during the Seven Years' Wars, when the king's Hanoverian predications made him detest Pitt's blue water strategy, which the king regarded as Pitt's neglect of the war in Europe. When in chapter 2, 3, and 5, study is made of the two great overseas struggles for North America and for India, respectively, readers should constantly bear in mind while reading of those overseas wars the stimulation drag on Britain's resources, which was imposed upon our country by this need to maintain at any rate a balance of power upon European continent itself. Fortunately, of course, this need to split resources fell equally heavily upon our rivals for colonial expansion, namely Portugal, Spain, Holland, and eventually France. Indeed, the ruin of three of these competitors for empire may be ascribed largely to their inability to strike a happy mean in their uh, allocations of national energy to colonial enterprise and to continental campaigning, respectively. The two small countries, Portugal and Holland, though each of them in turn enjoyed a brilliant period of colonial greatness, both fell out of the race through sheer inability to support simultaneously the burden of overseas empire building and of foreign pressures upon their land frontiers in Europe. Portugal was conquered by Philip II of Spain for 80 years and shared in the downfall of that great empire. Holland was weakened uh, by her resistance to Louis the 14th of France, that her overseas empire ceased to expand at a critical moment in the race. Uh, the case of Spain was perhaps the most instructive of all. For 100 years, she held the lead as the world's richest and most powerful nation. Her empire covered most of South America and nearly half of North America. Together with the Philippines and many Pacific archipelagos, in Europe she ruled much of Italy, Sardinia, Franco Comté, Belgium, and for a while uh, Holland, well, also, Holland also. Despite popular belief, it was not the defeat of her armada in 1588 which finished her as a great power. It was the fact that her crown had passed by inheritance into the powerful, ambitious, and bigoted Habsburg family. Uh, the wealth of Mexico, Peru was poured out to serve Habsburg policy to support the Roman Catholic faith against the Protestant Reformation. Into the resultant 30 years wars, nominally a religious struggle between the two divisions of Christendom. Spain, fanatical young king Philip III, threw all his kingdom's resources of wealth and manpower. It was an awful example of how not to strike a sane balance between colonial continental effort. Spain as a world power bled to death all over the European aspirants of to colonial empire. Only France and England managed to strike a healthy balance in this vital matter. England, though she made mistakes, never fell under the complete control of any military dictator ambitious for showy conquest of European lands. After being finally cured by Joan of Arc of all dreams of French overlordship. England wars on the continent became simply simple ways of maintaining the balance of power. As far as concerned the continental itself, there were no longer wars of conquest, but wars to prevent conquest. England's enemies on the continent became always that uh, potentate, potentate or nation which at the time was the biggest menace of European freedom. Thus, England tackled and defeated in turn Philip of Spain, Louis the Louis XIV of France, Napoleon, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and mid-century German. To gauge the extent of British entanglement with Europe, one has only the list of the wars undertaken against European powers on the continent of Europe or in European coastal waters from the end of the War of the Roses to the bloody, pointless Civil War down to the Battle of Waterloo. It should be remembered that every one of these wars had its decisive effect for the reason already explained, not only on the gradual building of a British Empire in other continents, but also up and including the 7 Years' Wars, upon the birth of the mighty English speaking dependency, the United States of America. Without such naval victories in Europe as the Armada Battle of 1588, La Hogue 1692, and Quiberon Bay 1759, or such victories at Blenheim 1704, Ramillies 1706, Undrained 1708, Malfcayet 1709, and Midden 1759, the United States could never have come into existence. The fact will become clear in Chapter 3 when we study England's struggle for North America, which opened the way for the 13 Atlantic colonies to spread themselves westwards into the Pacific across the formerly French owned Mississippi Valley. To sum up, the inhabitants of the British Isles from 1066 onwards became progressively more involved with the situation on the continent nearby. Their success and progress in empire building depended, among other factors, upon the skills of the British statesmen in assessing the minimum proportion of British effort to be expanded on maintenance of British interests on the continent of Europe in order that the maximum should be available for transoceanic enterprise, above all in seizing and keeping command of the seas. It has never been easy to find correct appointment or effort and adhere to it, partly because war and diplomacy are not sciences subject to precise measurements, but rather arts based on human judgments, and an even greater difficulty has always confronted British statesmen, even those enlightened ones who saw clearly the major importance of oceanic field of endeavour over the continental. In enforcing the policy which they knew to be correct, even the enlightened statesmen have always had a great deal of opposition from factions who failed to realise that for Great Britain the European commitment should always taken second place in a wider oceanic vision. Colin, do you have anything to add to that?
I think it's strange that he just calls the Habsburgs bigoted, just kind of like on the side. But I think
Well,
we should just finish the. Wait, did we finish that chapter? No, I don't.
no, we've still got a couple paragraphs.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is his criticism of the Habsburg isn't necessarily that they you know that they sort of favored Catholicism over Protestant or anything like that. It was that they threw away their empire for the sake of fighting the Reformations in Europe. And he said, listen, you could have struck up a healthy balance where you didn't, you know, piss off your colonial subjects in Latin America and and like fight Protestantism in Europe, in your possessions Europe, because again the Habsburgs, they were fighting Protestantism mainly in Bohemia and in the Netherlands. They were fighting it in their own territories, and they threw away their empire in the process, and they still somewhat. I mean, they didn't in Bohemia. They actually won. The Protestant forces there were defeated, and the Roman Catholic Church was somewhat reintroduced. But of course, as we know, in Holland, it failed largely.
Well, except for in what is now Belgium.
Well, yeah, but as I say, Holland, Netherlands. I say Netherlands. I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just mean that there were two places up for grabs, or all of the Netherlands was up for grabs at that point. So they did manage to hold on to. But I would say they lost their empire at the end of the day from just losing the or not having heirs.
Well,
I
I
mean,
mean, the Habsburgs weren't short of heirs because, I mean, I guess apart from keeping within the fact, I mean, I do understand what you mean though. There was, well, you have to remember you had two factions of the Habsburgs. You had the Spanish Habsburgs,
yeah,
and you had the Austrian Habsburgs, and that was the cause of problem with the war of the succession was
yeah, well,
between the
session.
yeah the succession. Um, and that's just I mean, that's sort of like a dynastic problem. I mean, one thing I would say is I would agree with you at one point that they didn't actually lose properly until when Napoleon marched into Spain, usurped the king. He was forced to flee to Latin America, and I think when Spain was captured by Napoleon, I think that did weaken it did weaken further the Spanish power in the region in Latin America and North America.
Well, then
But
wouldn't it mean that the Bourbons are to blame for the fall of the Spanish Empire and not the Habsburgs itself?
um
Because the Habsburgs weren't in control of Spain at the time Napoleon invaded.
but I think he's getting at the fact that the Habsburgs, when they acquired Spain and her empire, they didn't really like care about they basically just just robbed resources from their colonial possessions solely just to focus on you know what he determined to be a small crisis at home, and that it created like this. It started fermenting resentment, colonial resentment, abroad. Um, I think that's what he was sort of hinting at there. But yes, I mean, the thing is, the Bourbons. The question is, there was movement afoot before the Bourbons were usurped for like independence, largely inspired from American independence. Um, so it wouldn't be fair to say, oh well, it just all happened when when Napoleon invaded Spain. It had been building up then, from the legacy of the American and French revolutions.
Yeah, but both
Because
of those would be under the Bourbons, not under the Habsburgs. That's all. I totally understand that the governance of the Spanish Empire was not the best, but the Habsburgs mostly ruled the Spanish Empire during its early years, and not so much. I don't even know if you can say that it was they ruled them during their middle years.
I mean, I think his point was the Habsburgs began the sort of downward spiral of the Spanish because they became they couldn't strike a healthy balance where you know when an empire is at war, you don't want to basically to win a war, you don't want to like bring down your entire empire on top of you, sort of thing. um I mean, I'm surprised. What's like the idea of like the tale of Samson, to bring down the entire foundations on top of you. It's a victory, but at the same time, is it victory at all costs? Is what he's getting at.
Yeah, no, I agree that sort of a good balance is necessary. Um, I'm just I think one of the problems with this too is that when the Habsburgs are doing the like focusing on Europe, there wasn't really much um, dangers in America that weren't already being handled. So I have a feeling that it's easy to see from a perspective of, okay, I know that the colonies are eventually going to rebel, but I don't think anybody saw that as a possibility until, uh, well, the American Revolution, and even probably until the mid 1600s or mid to late 1600s, which, like I said, the Bourbons take control. I just think it's very like looking back, and vision from the future is always 2020, but I don't think it can be really accept or sort of blamed upon them. While the
Yeah,
British had so much, the British were able to look back at a bunch of different empires that have existed and uh, take sort of the trying to do the best governance possible, while Spain basically had to work off of no background.
yeah. I mean, but I think one thing that probably isn't explained quite well by Major General Hilton here is um, that, and I think if he actually proposed it like this, as you know, Spain had, it wasn't just Latin America, it was Central and North America. They were dominant in North America. You
Yeah,
know, they had claims from, what was it? It was as far as I think it was Oregon, all the
yeah.
way across the Midwest, effectively, to the borders of Louisiana.
Well, the French kind that was the French and this it went back between the French and the Spanish
Yeah, it went back,
at the
and then
time.
of course the Spanish had possession over Florida. Um, what's now like the border states, and of course Texas, and places like that. And you know, I think what's sort of getting at here is when towards the end of the Habsburg rule, you had this change in the Portuguese and the Spanish empires were on sort of the descent, and you had the French. I mean, the French Empire basically became the World Catholic Empire. I think if you would say, okay, the World Catholic Empire and the World Protestant Empire, England sort of embodied the World Protestant Empire, and France became embodied with like the World Catholic Empire. Um, and I think even though Spain retained those possessions in Europe, sorry, in the in the Americas, it, I don't they weren't as powerful enough, or as, I guess, even wealthy, compared to France. And you have to remember that you're coming up to also like the start of the industrialization period, or early industrialization,
Mhm.
where you know France and Britain um, excelled. Spain didn't. I mean, not just in the education and everything. There was. I don't want to sound like a wig when I say this, but Britain and France sort of made themselves both, economically but military ready for the modern age. I don't want to say, oh, they progressed, but they were just in the. I was saying they're in the ascendancy period,
Yeah.
um, which was true, but true because they did. Someone just Michael K19, and just remind me, the Habsburg Spain actually they did go bankrupt several times um, during that period as well. So that probably didn't help things.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they went bankrupt a number of times, but but yeah. A lot of a lot mismanagement of funds, definitely.
Yeah. Um, and it'd be interesting to know because who's the Habsburg, the Hungarian ambassador to the Holy See? Is it? I know he's a Habsburg.
Edward Habsburg.
Has he appeared on your channel before?
Yes, he has.
I wonder what his take on this, because I don't know. Is he like from the Austrian Hungarian faction of of the Habsburgs? I imagine
Yeah, there's only one.
there's
Fact.
only one now. Yeah, I wonder what he makes of his like his Spanish offshoot. What he makes of them.
He'd probably say something very diplomatic, being a diplomat.
Yeah. um. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Uh.
in some sense, there's nobody to insult because they don't have descendants except for, well, except for, you could argue, himself. He would be the only, him and his other family members would be the only ones that would be sort of descendants, but still.
Yeah, I just, cause the reason while I was reading this, I just thought to myself, oh, I hope he's not like too rude about the Habsburgs, because I realized Connor here has regularly streamed with with this, and I don't want him to have a falling out because Richard Hilton says something very naughty about a Habsburg monarch.
Yeah,
Um,
it's fine. I'm not. A lot of people. It's just like a lot of people tell the ambassador, or should I say, His Imperial and Royal Highness. They'll always try and make a incest joke at him, or be like, "Hey, you're an incest something," just like, and he just kind of just ignores it,
I
passes.
mean, on a pure historical level, though, ironically, it was, I believe, the incest Habsburgs were the Spanish ones, the ones that bankrupt Spain.
That's true. Mainly, yeah. I mean, though the Austrian branch at the time were not doing too well either on the incest part. So, but it was the most. I think it was have more heavily incestuous on the Spanish side. At least it came out with. I mean, I think the real reason for the Spanish decline is just that the last Spanish Habsburg was basically had half a brain, but also still had better brains than those who govern us now.
Oh my God, that's a black pill, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so true. It's like this is. I would rather have Charles II, who basically was a 10-year-old level of probably intellect or something, maybe 13-year-old intellect, because even he probably governed the Spanish country or Spanish kingdom better than uh, people do, or the people do now.
Yeah. I wonder if Joe Biden is related to the Spanish Habsburg somewhere.
I don't think so. He's very Irish,
He's very Irish, yeah.
though he grew up in black churches, whatever that means.
What was he protesting them
No,
growing up?
no. He just says that. He just says I
Oh,
grew up in black churches, which I don't have no idea what that means, but no one does. So
I mean, I've seen two different interviews where he says he was brought up in Pennsylvania, and then it was, oh, no, I was brought up in Connecticut, so I don't know.
what is Delaware? I don't know. He,
What, it's brought in Delaware?
well, he was the senator of Delaware. Oh no, he's from Pennsylvania, I thought. Or he was the senator from Delaware, I think, which is weird.
Yeah. Wasn't
But the
he
whole
done for?
point is I mean, he also plagiarized an Irish speech.
Yeah, he also plagiarized like several times.
Yeah,
The leader of the Labour Party during the 80s, which was Neil Kinnock, his speech, like not just once or twice, but I think three times.
America's not sending its best.
I mean, I can't repeat the words on YouTube, but basically, Thomas. I remember there was an interview years ago with Thomas Sowell, who I believe they went to the same law school together, or they were like in the sort of like same proximity as each other. And
Yeah.
he said something along the lines of, "Oh, it's not like Joe Biden's age. He's always been a special case, basically."
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's what I'm saying. Eh, like I'd rather have Charles II, or is it the third? Maybe it was the third, as
Yeah,
my ruler because he was still better, even though he like decided to give Spain over to the Bourbons for some reason. That always puzzles me. I never understand that. But
were they like related, the Bourbons?
well,
Somehow.
I think his aunt might have been the Queen of France or something like that.
I mean, you have to also remember that in these societies, the the counts and the dukes also had like the ascendancy, like the what they call the royal ascendancy, say. So kind of like how when Elizabeth I died without any heirs, and it was like
Well, what do we do?
what we're basically like, well, the next in line technically is the King of Scotland here, and it's like, oh, but then if he becomes King of England and lordship over Ireland and Wales, then technically like this one dynasty has complete control over the British Isles. So do we
Yeah.
want that?
Do
And
you
it's
really
like,
want?
well,
Do you really want Scotland to have conquered England? Sort of. Not really, but yeah.
or have like this how the Stuart family. And in the end, the Stuarts, it's quite interesting because effectively there was like what they call, like cadet branches, similar to what the Habsburgs did, where the Stuarts, under James ruled in England, but then you had like the offshoot of the Stuarts that remained in Scotland, and they were sort of somewhat separate, even though they were the same family.
I didn't
It's
know that.
funny how, yeah, yeah. If you actually look at clan documentation, they even use like different, like Stuarts would be spelt with a U and a A in England, but then
Yeah,
with a W in Scotland. So there was even like a different like
spelling.
spelling, that even though they were like the same, but there's actually because English law and Scottish law are different. Effectively, the monarch, even to this day, when they're in England, they're the head of the Church of England, and they have this function. But then, as soon as they cross into Scotland, they're not the head of the Church of Scotland, but they are a senior figure in the church as a defender, and they have a different responsibility entirely. So, yeah, it's kind of confusing and very hard to comprehend the actual um structure. And I
Well,
don't think,
you know how you said that the Stuarts ruled England like they like Scotland. Well, I think that they ruled at the same time they ruled England like Scotland. They ruled Scotland like England because they tried to give them bishops and stuff, and that became a whole thing.
yeah, oh no, I think that did happen because they
Yeah,
tried to, I again, this is the balance that you have. And the funny thing is, you think like, oh, an active union would be quite an easy thing to maintain, but it's not. It's actually quite a difficult one to maintain because it wasn't an official act of union, but at the same time you had the how do I keep both crowns without like annoying one side or the other, and also suppressing, keeping those pesky Catholics down at the same time. It's
how nice, how nice.
yeah. um Sorry. So this is a stream where we bully Catholics for an hour. So
You're just gonna bully me for good forever. Then
yes, I
I,
say bring the Habsburg ambassador on. We can. Uh,
I don't think he has time, AI.
no, I don't think he will put up with my bullying. Uh, so let's continue. Let's finish. It took hundreds of years for the spirit of the Enlightenment to rid English kings of their yearnings to recover the lost feudal lands in France. Then came a long period of religious altercation when wiser statesmen had resisted the clamor of Protestants to rush to the rescue of the Huguenots in France, or to the aid of Dutchmen against Spain. this is incredible. So basically, he's like, oh yes, we'll separate from Europe, but by the way, Protestants, yeah, no, we're not helping you. Bye bye.
Yep.
um, which again is quite true. The
Well,
Stuart,
just because Protestants, in some sense, don't mean anything except for a unity in opposition to Catholics. Not really meaning anything for England itself.
I would say in for the Scottish, probably there was a great affinity with the Dutch because of the
Maybe.
Calvinist and some element of Calvinist connection. But I mean, largely, yeah. I mean, the division within the Protestants, um, the Protestant movement, made it difficult. And also, you have to remember that the Anglican Church, even at that time, it was largely considered by itself, or the High Church, let's say, that like the governing elements of the church, and towards the monarchy and all that, uh, effectively view themselves as an independent Catholic Church. So they weren't like, in their minds, they weren't, say, on the same wavelengths as like Luther or Calvin. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
They weren't thinking in those terms,
So
and still don't.
English Protestantism is more of a um, was more of a political thing at the at the beginning.
Yeah, it's not a rejection of the idea of the structures of the Catholic Church. It was only it was effectively like a separation, because that's why in England the Reformation is, it says, the separation of the Catholic Church. In Europe, it's like the revolution, or the replacing of the Catholic Church with, say, the Lutheran churches, or the Reformed, or the Calvin, whatever, wherever it was.
Uh-huh.
um and so yeah.
Or the failure, depending on where you are.
Yeah, or the failure. Well, I mean, I don't now, Connor. I'm going to have to call out your bias here, but I don't think we can call the Prussian kingdom a failure at this point
No, I
in
meant
our
just
story.
failure in France or failure in Spain.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
depending
yeah.
on depending on your location, you would be either seeing a failure of Protestantism or a success for Protestantism.
I mean, I would say that the wars, what they call the wars of religion in France, I think it did weaken Catholic authority, because I think that was a direct knock on towards when you had the French Revolution and the anti-clericalism of like the Jacobins and the various bourgeois revolutionary movements. I think there was maybe not so much a ideological Protestantism, but the need for uh, or like a resentment, if that makes sense.
Well, that would be odd because the same people that rejected a Protestant king in France were then in the future the main people who uh, participated in the French Revolution. So why would they have they were the best supporters of the Catholic cause? Like in London, the reason that which Henry the something, can't remember, uh, had to convert to Catholicism in order to gain the French crown because the Parisians wouldn't let him in. He wasn't going to be able to take Paris as a Protestant.
I mean, I would say that, and Alice just pointed out, what I was getting at was people like Rousseau, Necker, they were from Protestant families, and I think what you have to what you have to remember, Connor, is that I guess what you could say, the mercantile middle class, or the third estate, um, really became, I don't want to say demographically change, but there were shifts in urban to rural life. But what I was getting at is the sort of energy, like the sort of the anti-Catholic, because it did manifest itself from somewhere, because it sort of,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
True, but at the end of the day, I think the French Revolution was caused more by famine and by uh, uh, the small elite that used that to overthrow the old elite. So I guess in some sense, yes,
Oh
that
yes, yeah.
stems from uh, the wars of religion, but it required the masses to be manipulated, while in the wars of Catholic wars of religion in France, the populace wasn't as easily manipulated.
Well, no, because of course, Robespierre, his thing was to, he went like one step further and tried to create a new religion like altogether. Um, the what was it, the cult of the supreme being or something like that.
Yeah,
And he gave that speech at that tree outside Paris here to the Parisian mob, and they all laughed at him
and then
and
they
walked
had him
away.
killed.
Yeah, and then like days later, he was just accused. He just, I mean, he was. I don't want to say accused because he did. He's not accused. He's guilty of it. Um, but he just ended up, like in all good revolutionary movements, he ended up just killing off, Danton, his revolutionary ally. Um, who was the other one? There was the propagandist. I forgot his name now. Um, I can't remember his name now. There's a propagandist one who worked, wrote papers and everything. But he ended up just killing them all off, for anti-revolutionary, collaborating with the Austrians, all that sort of stuff. The Austrian spies. Marat, there we go, Marat. Yeah.
Right.
So uh, yeah, I mean, he was guilty. Uh, so I'll just finish the chapter, shall I? And then we can probably do like a continue discussion. It took several hundred years for the spirit of the Enlightenment to rid English kings of their yearnings to recover the lost feudal lands in France. Then came a long period of religious altercation when wise statesmen had to resist the clamour of Protestants to rush to the rescue of Huguenots in France or the aid of Dutchmen against Spain. The Stuart kings were apt into intrigue in the opposite direction, to plot with France or Spain for cooperation in defence of the Roman Catholic Church against the Reformation. Cromwell himself allowed his religious bias to override his diplomatic judgment when he persisted in regarding Spain as the enemy long after she had ceased to be a menace to England. Walpole, who was Prime Minister, against his better judgment, was chived by popular outcry into war with Spain over the matter of Jenkins' ear, and thus was responsible for England's unprepared embroilment in a war with both France and Spain, united in the Bourbon family compact. Pitt the Elder's disagreement with his king concerning aid to Hanover has already been mentioned. He was by no means the only statesman of the blue uh, um, of the Blue Water School um, to fall foul of the Hanoverian point of view. So this conflict has rumbled on between two schools and thought up to our present times. This argument has been based not only on strategic issues, but included questions of economics and very political future of Great Britain as an independent nation. We hear much today about the common market, whose exponents, like the various Europeans of old, wish us to pin our national future upon complete political submission into Europe. To put the matter at its mildest, such a policy would run directly contrary to the one which enabled our small nation to build worldwide empire. Um, and in many ways, uh, that is that final bit there. Of course, before the European Union, but eventually he foresaw the creation of the European Union, and that very much that same sentiment is what caused Brexit, and the same sort of arguments that sort of formulated into what Brexit, what Dominic Cummings and people like that made Brexit about, and it. I think what's hard to really sort of view, and this is where where you see like the difference in societies, is that Britain was in its ascendancy, but it was also had a time where you had, I guess, you had people of the legacy of the Civil War, of great hardship, and I think a great deal of the Civil War was airbrushed in England, in my country. A lot of like the actual scale of it is largely airbrushed, unless you live anywhere near great battles or the legacy of destroyed castles. It's hard to really comprehend because of course, England was rebuilt between then and now, but the hardship it created and the character it created for the explorers, the military people, the people who, you know, you know, let's be honest, founded the empire, um, were born of exceptional time, and those very same people cannot come through society today, because we today we live in relative you know peace and harmony. We're not at risk of you know we're not at risk of having a half our family wiped out, and um, fighting in huge wars. Yeah. Well, not yet anyway. I mean, give it another year. I
Yeah.
no doubt, Connor, I'll be storming the beaches of Persia or something like that.
Will AA be joining you?
Well, no, I mean, that on a very serious note, probably all of us online would be all interned in prisons or something. To be absolutely honest. Um,
Well, unless they brainwash you and then put you at the front.
I mean, I could like flee to Russia and pull like a Lord Haw something.
You could, you could flee to
um,
Hungary.
yeah, flee to Hungary or somewhere like that. Well, I could go to the Vatican and like sort of claim like can you give me sanctuary?
I'm not sure they'd let you in, to be honest.
No, I don't think I'd be. I think I'd be kicked out, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think my point is that the there was something in the British spirit, and it was within the Scots, it was within the English, it was within like the and this is me going to be very controversial here. I would say within the Anglo-Irish, um, maybe not the Irish completely, but the Anglo-Irish, you had like these very sort of heroic figures of explorers, of warriors, um, and even in the mercantile thing. And I think when we talk about merchants and the sort of underhandness, the sort of feminine aspects of them, you forget you go back, say, to like the East Indian Company. I mean, okay, they were merchants, but also they fought in like open battlefields. They would like take shrapnel to the legs or something, or be stabbed by a spear, and they'll like continue fighting, and then they'll do like accounting or something. I mean, you can't really say, oh, you can't really compare the modern merchant sort of types of today to those people, because I mean it's completely different. But
Well, yeah, the modern or sorry, the merchants of those days basically wanted to be uh, noble.
yeah, and you hear on the on like I would say Nazpol right, the and elements of distant right, that the Britain was, the Rothschilds and the small hats and the, controlling the British Empire, and the city of London, the usual, the sort of rhetoric you hear. But in reality, the small hat people uh weren't they weren't like the small hat people in America, who where the sort of power and influence is drastically different. Because, and I think Bronze Age Purvitt put it perfectly in one of his, I think it was also like Nietzsche pointed it out, was that, the mercantile class of Britain were the Scots. Believe it or not, it was actually like a cartel of Scottish merchants. Always in like Calcutta, Bombay, Singapore, Hong Kong. It
So,
was it was
so is it cartel of Columbus?
pretty much, it was a cartel of Columbus.
That sounds like a
and
lot of fun.
and the thing there is, they would sort and so for the small hats who did live in England, there wasn't really any room to do anything. um there wasn't any room to exert any power, really. It just wasn't there. Even, I mean, even I know, like, Disraeli. Let's look at Disraeli for a minute. Normally he had to declare himself a Christian. Now, of course, I don't think he was. I don't think he actually, in his personal life, I don't believe he was a Christian. I think he still adhered to um, his family's beliefs. But um, you know, it, you see the difference. Um, I mean, yeah, so Matheson is still company in Hong Kong, and in Hong Kong, the largest harbour there is Aberdeen Harbour. So the actual, I remember David Starkey, historian. He actually had like this brilliant sort of monologue where he said like the most nefarious companies, um, um, he, the most nefarious companies in the empire were always like Scottish trading companies. um, and they were the ones that got the Chinese hooked to opium. So, see, many Scottish nationalists would like to play the victim in like the role of the British Empire. It's not entirely, not entirely true. And Alice points out that the Sephardic, because again, the British population of the Jews were Sephardic, and they were deeply opposed to the Ashkenazi, um, for various reasons. But yes.
Well, do you think there, because you mentioned Brexit, do you think there's a new wave of, was it of the Blue Water School?
No, no, I
No.
don't.
Okay.
No, no, because I think Brexit was. I think one of the problems for Britain is that you, we were sandwiched between the American Empire and the European Union. And I will say there are elements, Connor, within the European Union and the European project where it is explicitly anti-American, and they want to be anti-American. And the idea is they want to all unite, expand, build up strength, and be able to stand separate from America. That is their that there is a faction in there, quite a powerful, dominant one. I believe Macron and people like that are sort of part of it as well. Um,
So a new German empire.
yeah, something like Franco-German dominance, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, but
Spain and
we all know Germany is going to dominate that.
I mean the only thing is, internally in Germany, it is um uh Germany's a bit tricky at the moment, because you've got the East Germany and West Germany is like at polar opposites at the moment. And you know it depends which Germany comes out on top. I mean, when I say East Germany, of course, is like the AfD, sort of bit more German, uh, bit more German centered. I don't want to say right wing because they're not really right wing. They're just a bunch of German liberals, to be absolutely blunt. They're not right wing. I mean, their leader is a lesbian, for God's sake. So let's not kid ourselves here.
Yikes,
Uh,
that's pretty low even for Germans.
well, I don't think she is the leader, but she's like like leader in parliament or something like that. But
Is she like
uh,
the lesbian Nana?
no, she's got a bit more longer hair. I mean, she's also prettier as well. I mean, it's an
Oh.
absolute it's a tragedy, but uh, I see. I blame CIA propaganda, but um,
I blame
uh,
brainwashing, just in
yeah,
general.
it's like long-term CIA propaganda, for denazification. So, um, um, yeah, pan-Eurasianism, stuff like that. I mean, the only thing is, in that problem, like Poland is shockingly, um, uh, Poland has demonstrated the stuff with Ukraine, like shockingly, large support to America, along with a lot of the former uh, Soviet like um, Baltic states. So there is like you still have old American alliances still bubbling, but because Britain left, it's kind of like we've gone out of the frying pan sort of into the fire um, in that regard. And um, I mean, functionally, Britain is kind of like the 51st state. Whatever America says, we do.
Thought that was Puerto Rico. Um, or
No, I think Puerto Rico has probably more self-governing than we do at this point. That's
well,
yeah.
hey, I should be getting going soon. So, if do you want to wrap this up, or do you want to continue? And I'll just head out.
And I mean, no, I think we'll probably head out now because it's coming to the 2 hour mark, and we've covered the first chapter. I'll just do you want to summarize your position on it quickly, Connor?
Well, I mean, it's not other than some British jabs towards Catholics. It, it's very. I mean, it's very much just a solid historical introduction to the um, the British Empire's infancy, especially bringing back the Normans and sort of looking at how well they weren't French and how they sort of brought that link to Europe. And I mean, even that sort of the Hanoverians as well, and also brought that link a little back to this sort of battle between sort of the European focused versus the uh, blue water school. It's interesting to see, and it will be interesting to as we go see how it develops.
Yeah, I think just to summarize quickly, I think he's demonstrated uh, kind of I think a deep-rooted sentiment that does exist in a lot of English people of of that there is this feeling that we are separate from mainland Europe, not just on like geopolitical stuff, but there's something in the DNA of us that it does feel different than say France, Spain, France and Spain and like Italy and Southern Europe. And I think he sort of explains it quite well.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think when we go on, we'll see maybe in the decline bit we might see, you know, where where the attitude change came from and why it changed. But anyway, thank you for joining me, Connor, and hopefully we can do like a chapter 2 or part 2 at some point, and then sort of go on from there. Yeah, I think it's been quite good this session.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on, and it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, you too. And thanks to everyone who's been in chat. And I'm going to do a bit more promotion for this thing because there'll be a lot of people that'll be watching it over the coming. There'll be people watching it over the coming days and weeks. So I'll be putting that out there. And yeah. So apart from that, everyone have a good night and see you all next time.